In the pitch darkness of a July night in 1881, the most feared gunslinger in the American West walked barefoot into a bedroom, asked a simple question in Spanish, and died instantly, never knowing who killed him. Billy the Kid had survived 21 years dodging death, only to walk straight into it. The death that ended the Wild West's most notorious manhunt happened in less than 2 seconds. No dramatic showdown, no final words of defiance, just a confused question in the dark, followed by 2 shots that would echo through American history forever. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Billy the Kid chose comfort over survival, how his killer waited in total darkness, and the shocking truth about what really happened in those final seconds that transformed a small-time rustler into an immortal legend. Here's what they never told you. Billy could have easily escaped to Mexico. Every lawman in New Mexico territory knew exactly where to find him, and the person who likely betrayed him was someone he trusted with his life. Why did Billy ignore multiple warnings to flee? Who sent the anonymous tip that sealed his fate? What were his actual last words before Pat Garrett pulled the trigger? These questions have haunted the American West for over 140 years. The truth involves a former slave woman who may have betrayed her lover, a sheriff who hunted his former friend, and a wealthy landowner who found himself hosting an execution in his own bedroom. It's a story of how the most careful outlaw in the West made one fatal mistake. He chose love and friendship over survival. To understand how the West's most notorious outlaw met such an ignoble end, we need to go back 9 weeks to a bloody jailbreak that set these tragic events in motion. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of the Wild West's most legendary outlaws, hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales of frontier justice. Now, let me take you back to the dusty streets of Fort Sumner, where Billy the Kid's luck was about to run out. Fort Sumner in 1881 was nothing like the military outpost it had been 20 years earlier. The abandoned fort had transformed into a sprawling village, where former soldiers, Mexican families, and men running from the law created an unlikely community on the Pecos River. This is where Billy the Kid found sanctuary, and where he would find death. The man hunting him, Pat Garrett, stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, a giant in an era when most men barely reached 5'8". But here's what the history books won't tell you. Garrett and Billy had once been friends. They'd gambled together, drank together, and shared the rough camaraderie of the frontier. Now Garrett wore a sheriff's badge and carried a warrant for Billy's arrest. The real Billy the Kid was nothing like his legend. Born Henry McCarty, he stood about 5 feet 7 inches, with buck teeth and a slight build. The myth says he killed 21 men, 1 for each year of his life. The truth? He killed 4 men in gunfights and helped kill 5 others. Still deadly, but far from the unstoppable killing machine of dime novel fame. Fort Sumner had become Billy's haven because of the Maxwell family. Pete Maxwell, son of land baron Lucien Maxwell, controlled the abandoned fort and its surrounding territory. The Maxwells employed dozens of Hispanic families who had known Billy since the Lincoln County War. These people protected him, fed him, and warned him when danger approached. Then there was Delovina Maxwell, and this is where the story takes a deadly turn. She wasn't actually a Maxwell by blood. Captured by Apaches as a child and later rescued, she'd been raised as a servant in the Maxwell household. Some say she and Billy had been lovers. Others insist she remained loyal to the man who saved her from starvation. What nobody disputes is that she knew everything that happened in Fort Sumner. The Lincoln County War had ended 3 years earlier, but its shadows still darkened New Mexico. Billy had been on the wrong side, riding with the Tunstall-McSween faction against the powerful Santa Fe Ring. When the shooting stopped, his friends were dead, and Billy was a wanted man with a $500 bounty on his head. Think about this irony. Fort Sumner was the most obvious place Billy could hide, yet he stayed there for weeks at a time. Every lawman in the territory knew about his connection to the place. Garrett himself had worked as a bartender in Fort Sumner before becoming sheriff. He knew Billy's habits, his friends, his favorite haunts. The abandoned military buildings had been converted into homes, stores, and saloons. The old officers' quarters where Pete Maxwell lived had 21 rooms, a mansion by frontier standards. Adobe walls 3 feet thick kept the rooms cool in summer and warm in winter. These same walls would muffle the gunshots that ended Billy the Kid's life. But why would Billy return to the one place everyone expected him to be? The answer involves a combination of arrogance, comfort, and something more human. The simple desire to be among friends. Billy spoke fluent Spanish, danced at the bales, and was genuinely liked by the Mexican community. To them, he wasn't an outlaw, but a young man who'd stood against the corrupt Anglo establishment. The stage was set for the final act of Billy the Kid's short, violent life. All the players were in position: the hunter, the hunted, and the community caught between them. 9 weeks before his death, Billy the Kid made the escape that would seal his fate. On April 28, 1881, he sat shackled in the Lincoln County Courthouse, sentenced to hang for killing Sheriff William Brady. His guards, James Bell and Bob Olinger, thought they had him secure. They were dead wrong. What happened next defies belief. While Olinger ate lunch across the street, Billy asked Bell to take him to the outhouse. On the return trip up the stairs, Billy, still in shackles, somehow got hold of a pistol. Some say a sympathizer hid it in the privy. Others claim Billy slipped his small hands from the cuffs and grabbed Bell's own gun. The truth died with both men. Bell took a bullet in the back and stumbled into the street before dying. Billy, chains clanking, hobbled to the window with Ollinger's own shotgun, a weapon the sadistic deputy loved to taunt him with. When Ollinger ran from the restaurant, Billy called out, "Hello, Bob." Then he gave Ollinger both barrels. For the next hour, Billy held court from the courthouse balcony. The entire town watched as he demanded tools to remove his shackles. Nobody dared challenge him. When finally free, he stole a horse and rode out of Lincoln, leaving 2 dead deputies and a shattered reputation for law enforcement. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Billy's escape route led directly to Fort Sumner. Despite having all of New Mexico to choose from, despite friends urging him to flee to Mexico, he rode straight to the one place everyone expected. It took him 9 days, hiding in sheep camps and dodging posses, but he made it to Fort Sumner by May 7. Meanwhile, Pat Garrett assembled his hunting team. John W. Poe, a detective from the Panhandle Stock Association, brought expertise in tracking outlaws. Thomas Kip McKinney, Garrett's deputy, provided backup. These 3 men would converge on Fort Sumner with deadly purpose. The anonymous tip that changed everything arrived in early July. Someone in Fort Sumner sent word that Billy was staying at the abandoned fort, moving between several houses but always returning to see certain people. The tipster mentioned Delavina's house specifically. They knew Billy's routines, his habits, even which women he visited. Las Vegas newspapers tracked Billy's movements through rumor and hearsay. "The Kid spotted near Fort Sumner," one headline read. "Dances at bail while lawmen search," read another. Billy seemed to taunt his pursuers, appearing publicly when he should have been hiding. Fort Sumner's residents found themselves in an impossible position. The Mexican families who comprised most of the population sympathized with Billy, but Garrett had the law on his side and the political backing of powerful men. Some residents fed false information to lawmen. Others simply refused to talk. A few, perhaps, decided that $500 was worth more than loyalty. This is where the story takes a deadly turn. Billy had established a pattern. He stayed at sheep camps outside town during the day, rode in after dark, visited his favorite people, then disappeared before dawn. He felt safe among the Hispanic community, speaking Spanish, dancing at their celebrations, sharing their meals. But someone in that community had turned against him. The identity of the informant remains one of the great mysteries of the Old West. Some historians point to Delavina herself, angry over Billy's attention to other women. Others suggest a jealous rival or someone desperate for the reward money. What we know is that the information was devastatingly accurate. On July 13, 1881, Garrett's team reached the outskirts of Fort Sumner. They interviewed residents who all claimed ignorance of Billy's whereabouts. But Garrett knew better. That evening, in a peach orchard outside town, he spotted men he recognized as Billy's associates. The hunters had found their prey's territory. What Billy didn't know was that Garrett had decided to visit Pete Maxwell that very night. Not to arrest Billy. Garrett had no idea Billy would be there. He simply wanted to pressure Maxwell for information. It was a routine interrogation that would become an execution. As midnight approached on July 14, forces converged that would end the Wild West's most famous outlaw hunt. The stage was set for the final act of Billy the Kid's short, violent life. July 13 turned into July 14. As Pat Garrett and his 2 companions approached Pete Maxwell's adobe mansion, the moon had set, leaving Fort Sumner in near total darkness. Garrett knew these streets, these buildings, these people. He'd lived here, worked here, made friends here. Now he returned as a hunter. The 3 lawmen had spent the evening in frustration. Every resident they questioned claimed ignorance of Billy's whereabouts. But Garrett noticed the fear in their eyes, the nervous glances, the way conversation stopped when he appeared. Billy was close. He could feel it. Picture Fort Sumner in 1881. Adobe buildings clustered around the old parade ground. Cottonwood trees throwing dark shadows. The Pecos River gurgling nearby. Dogs barking at strangers. The smell of pinon smoke and cooking beans. A community trying to sleep while hosting the territory's most wanted man. The Maxwell House dominated the settlement. 21 rooms built from the officers' quarters of the abandoned fort. 3-foot-thick adobe walls that had sheltered military commanders now housed Pete Maxwell, his family, and numerous servants. The building formed a square around a central courtyard, with a long portal-covered porch facing the old parade ground. Here's the detail that changes everything. Garrett didn't plan to find Billy that night. He simply wanted information from Maxwell, knowing the wealthy young man had connections throughout Fort Sumner. Garrett decided on a midnight visit to catch Maxwell off guard, perhaps frightened enough to reveal Billy's location. As they approached Maxwell's house, Garrett noticed fresh meat hanging from the portal, a side of beef butchered that day. This seemingly minor detail would soon prove fatal. The three lawmen moved quietly, aware that Billy had friends everywhere in Fort Sumner who might warn him of their presence. But fate had other plans. Unknown to Garrett, Billy the Kid was at that very moment just a quarter-mile away, visiting Celsa Gutierrez, sister-in-law of his friend Pat Gutierrez. He'd arrived after dark, as was his custom, planning to stay until the early morning hours before retreating to the safety of the sheep camps. Garrett stationed Poe and McKinney outside Maxwell's bedroom window. The room was on the southeast corner of the building, with one door opening onto the portal and windows facing the old parade ground. Garrett knew Maxwell's habits. The young landowner often slept with his door open on hot summer nights. The brutal truth finally emerges. Garrett entered Maxwell's darkened bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Maxwell woke startled but recognized Garrett's voice. "Pete, do you know where Billy the Kid is?" Garrett whispered. Maxwell, terrified, insisted he didn't know. Meanwhile, Billy decided he was hungry. He'd been at Celsa's house for hours without eating. Someone mentioned the fresh beef hanging at Maxwell's, just a short walk away. Billy knew the house well, had visited many times. He felt safe in Fort Sumner, among friends. This single decision would cost him everything. Billy left Celsa's house barefoot, carrying his boots to move quietly. Summer in New Mexico meant hot days and warm nights. Going barefoot was common. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt, unbuttoned in the heat. In his hand, he carried a butcher knife to cut meat from the hanging beef. The irony is almost unbearable. Billy the Kid, the most careful and paranoid of outlaws, walked casually toward death because he wanted a late-night snack. Every survival instinct that had kept him alive for years failed him in that moment. As Billy approached Maxwell's portal, he noticed two men sitting outside but couldn't identify them in the darkness. Poe and McKinney saw him too but didn't recognize the barefoot figure. They assumed he was a servant or vaquero. Billy, suspicious but not alarmed, decided to ask Pete Maxwell about the strangers. What happened next still haunts Fort Sumner. Billy stepped onto the portal, knife in hand, boots in the other. The fresh beef hung just feet away, but those two unknown figures bothered him. In the frontier, strangers at midnight usually meant trouble. Instead of confronting the men directly, Billy made a choice that sealed his fate. He would ask his friend Pete about them. He padded barefoot along the portal to Maxwell's open door. The room beyond was pitch black. Billy couldn't see Garrett sitting on the bed's edge. Garrett couldn't see Billy approaching. This is when Billy made his fatal mistake. Rather than calling out from the doorway, he entered the room. The darkness was absolute. Maxwell lay in bed, terrified. Garrett sat motionless, hand on his revolver. And Billy the Kid, the most hunted man in New Mexico, walked blindly into the trap. Time seemed to stop. In that darkness, three men held their breath. One knew death had entered his room. One recognized the voice of a man he'd once called friend. And one was about to ask the last question of his life. As the clock struck midnight, two men were about to meet in darkness. One seeking answers, one seeking meat, both finding death instead. Billy the Kid stepped into Pete Maxwell's bedroom at approximately 11:50 p.m. on July 14, 1881. The darkness inside was so complete that he couldn't see his own hand, much less the two figures already in the room. Maxwell lay frozen in his bed. Pat Garrett sat on the bed's edge, his hand already moving to his Colt .45. For a moment, nobody moved. Billy sensed something wrong. The darkness felt occupied, charged with a presence that shouldn't be there. He could hear breathing that wasn't Pete's. The room smelled of sweat and gun oil, not the usual scent of Maxwell's cologne and cigars. "¿Quién es? ¿Quién es?" Billy asked in Spanish. "Who is it? Who is it?" Those 5 words sealed his fate. Garrett recognized the voice instantly. He'd heard it hundreds of times in saloons, around campfires, across card tables. This was Billy the Kid, his former friend, now worth $500 dead or alive. But then, something happened that changed everything. Billy took another step into the room, moving closer to the bed. He still couldn't see Garrett, but some instinct made him reach for his gun, except he wasn't wearing one. The knife in his hand was for cutting beef, not fighting. Garrett didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he drew his Colt, pointed it at the voice in the darkness, and fired. The muzzle flash illuminated the room for a split second, just long enough for Billy to see his killer's face. But recognition came too late. The bullet struck Billy just above the heart, tearing through his chest. The impact spun him sideways. Garrett, not taking chances, fired again. This second shot missed, burying itself in the adobe wall. But it wasn't needed. Billy the Kid fell without a sound. No last words. No dramatic death scene. He hit the floor hard, his unused knife clattering beside him. Blood pooled beneath his white shirt. His bare feet twitched once, then stilled. The most feared gunslinger in the American West died confused, unarmed, and barefoot in a dark bedroom. Maxwell screamed and rolled out of bed, crashing into furniture. "That was the kid!" he shouted. "You've killed Billy!" Garrett stood frozen, gun still pointed at the darkness. The powder smoke hung thick in the air. Outside, Poe and McKinney heard the shots and rushed toward the door. They met Garrett backing out, wild-eyed and shaking. "I think I've killed the kid," he said, but uncertainty plagued him. The darkness had been absolute. What if he'd shot the wrong man? What nobody talks about is the chaos that followed. Maxwell's house erupted in screams. Servants ran in all directions. Women began wailing. Men grabbed weapons, unsure if more shooting would follow. The entire settlement of Fort Sumner woke to the sound of tragedy. Garrett refused to re-enter the room until they had light. "Get a candle!" he shouted. But even this simple task proved difficult. In the confusion, nobody could find matches. Finally, a servant brought a lit candle from another room. The most chilling part was yet to come. As the candle's light pushed back the darkness, they saw Billy's body sprawled on the floor. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Blood had soaked through his white shirt and spread across the packed earth floor. The knife lay where it had fallen, unused. Garrett knelt beside the body, confirming what he already knew. This was indeed William Bonney, alias Billy the Kid. The young man who'd terrorized New Mexico was dead at 21, but looking at the slight figure on the floor, barefoot and weaponless, Garrett felt no triumph. "Here's what the history books won't tell you." Garrett wept. Not openly, not where others could see, but tears ran down his face as he stared at his former friend. They'd shared drinks, played cards, laughed at the same jokes. Now one was a hero, and the other was meat. The women of Fort Sumner took charge of the scene. They pushed past the lawmen, past Maxwell, past the growing crowd of onlookers. Deluvina Maxwell was among the first to reach Billy's body. She cradled his head in her lap, smoothing back his hair, speaking to him in Spanish as if he could hear. But wait, the night wasn't over. As word spread through Fort Sumner, armed men began gathering. Some were Billy's friends, furious at his death. Others simply resented the Anglo lawmen invading their community. Garrett found himself trapped in Maxwell's house, unsure if he'd survive the night. Jesus Silver, a respected community elder, helped calm the situation. He reminded the angry crowd that Billy had entered Maxwell's room, armed. They didn't know he carried only a butcher knife. He pointed out that Garrett had acted in self-defense, even if the self-defense was against an unarmed man. The truth is far more disturbing than any legend. Billy the Kid died not in a blaze of glory but in confusion and darkness. He never got to use his famous quick draw. He never spoke defiant last words. He died as so many young men die, suddenly, violently, without meaning or dignity. As dawn approached, Garrett made a decision that would haunt him forever. He ordered Billy's body moved to the carpenter shop, where it would be prepared for burial. But first, he needed an official inquest to clear himself of murder charges. The silence that followed was deafening. Fort Sumner, usually bustling with morning activity, remained quiet. Men spoke in whispers. Women prepared food for a wake instead of breakfast. Children were kept indoors, away from the blood and sorrow. What made this worse was the speed of it all. From the moment Billy entered the room to his death took less than 10 seconds. A life of 21 years ended in heartbeats. A legend born in an instant of recognition and reaction. Poe and McKinney guarded the body while Garrett wrote his report. He was careful with his words, making sure to emphasize that Billy had been armed with a knife and that he'd acted in immediate self-defense. The report would become the official version of events, but there was one person who knew exactly where Billy would be, and this knowledge torments historians. Who sent the anonymous tip? Who knew Billy's routines so well? The suspects were few. Only someone close to Billy could have provided such accurate information. As the sun rose on July 15, 1881, Billy the Kid lay dead in a carpenter shop. Pat Garrett sat exhausted in Maxwell's house, wondering if he'd be seen as a hero or a murderer, and Fort Sumner prepared to bury its most famous resident. The echo of those two shots would reverberate through the American West forever. But first, there was a body to prepare, an inquest to hold, and a legend to begin. Dawn broke over Fort Sumner on July 15, 1881, revealing a community in shock. Milner Rudolph, the Justice of the Peace, arrived to conduct the coroner's inquest. 6 men were quickly assembled as jurors, all Fort Sumner residents who knew both killer and victim. The inquest was held in the same room where Billy died. Blood still stained the floor. The bullet hole from Garrett's second shot scarred the adobe wall. Rudolph questioned Garrett, Maxwell, Poe, and McKinney. Each told the same story. Billy entered armed, Garrett fired in self-defense. But here's what they didn't tell you. The jury deliberated for less than 5 minutes. Their verdict: William Bonney came to his death from a gunshot wound, the weapon being in the hands of Pat Garrett, and our verdict is that the act of said Garrett was justifiable homicide. The speed suggested a community eager to put the matter behind them. The preparation of Billy's body fell to the women of Fort Sumner. Deluvina Maxwell took charge, washing away the blood, closing his eyes, dressing him in borrowed clothes. She worked in silence, her tears falling on Billy's still face. Other women helped, including Celsa Gutierrez, who'd seen Billy alive just hours before. Jesus Silver, Fort Sumner's carpenter, built the coffin from raw pine boards. The sound of his hammer echoed through the settlement as he worked through the morning heat. The coffin was simple, unadorned, fitting for a young man who owned little beyond his guns and reputation. What happened next defies belief. Garrett applied for the $500 reward before Billy's body was cold. He sent telegrams to Governor Lew Wallace and various newspapers, announcing his success. The same man who'd wept over his friend's corpse now calculated his profit from the killing. The funeral took place on the afternoon of July 15. Despite the short notice, dozens attended. The Hispanic community turned out in force, treating Billy's funeral like that of a fallen hero rather than an outlaw. Women wore black. Men removed their hats. Children threw flowers on the coffin. Fort Sumner's cemetery sat on a small hill overlooking the Pecos River. 2 of Billy's gang already lay there, Tom O'Folliard and Charlie Bowdra, both killed by Garrett's posse months earlier. Now Billy would join his friends in death as he had in life. The procession moved slowly through the July heat. Garrett didn't attend. He remained at Maxwell's house, guarded by his deputies. Some say he watched from a window as his former friend was carried to the grave. Others claim he was already planning his departure from Fort Sumner. At the cemetery, Father Juan Frack performed a simple service. He spoke in Spanish, calling Billy a young man who lost his way. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Billy had died entering a friend's house, seeking food, not violence. His death seemed more tragedy than justice. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As Silver's coffin was lowered into the ground, someone suggested marking the grave properly. 3 wooden crosses were erected, 1 each for Billy, O'Folliard, and Bowdra. Someone carved pals on a wooden board and placed it at their feet. The division of Fort Sumner became immediate and lasting. Those who mourned Billy saw Garrett as a betrayer who'd killed an unarmed friend for money. Those who supported law and order called Garrett a hero who'd ended a reign of terror. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between. Personal stories emerged in the days following. Deluvina told anyone who'd listen that Billy had been coming for food, not trouble. Celsa Gutierrez revealed that she'd begged Billy to leave for Mexico that very night. Pete Maxwell, traumatized by witnessing the killing, left Fort Sumner for an extended stay with relatives. But the real tragedy was the speed with which myth replaced reality. Within days, newspapers reported that Billy had killed 21 men. The story of him dying unarmed was changed to a dramatic gunfight. His last words became defiant challenges instead of confused questions in Spanish. Garrett received his $500 reward, but found it came with a price. Many in New Mexico saw him as a Judas who'd betrayed a friend. He would spend the rest of his life defending his actions, writing books, and giving interviews about that night in Fort Sumner. The immediate transformation of Billy from man to legend happened before his grave was settled. Dime novels appeared within weeks. Photographers sold images claiming to be Billy, though only one authenticated photo exists. The myth grew with each telling. Death statistics tell the real story. Billy the Kid killed 4 men in fair fights: Windy Cahill in Arizona, Joe Grant in Fort Sumner, James Bell and Bob Ollinger during his escape. He helped kill 5 others during the Lincoln County War. 9 dead men total, not the 21 of legend. Even today, the aftermath of that night resonates. Fort Sumner would never be the same. The settlement that had sheltered Billy became forever linked with his death. Tourists began arriving within months, wanting to see where Billy the Kid died. But Billy's death was just the beginning of his immortality. The barefoot boy who died confused in the darkness would become the most famous outlaw in American history. Today, Billy the Kid's grave in Fort Sumner is surrounded by a steel cage. This isn't for decoration. The tombstone has been stolen 3 times since 1940. Each time, it's been recovered and returned, only to be stolen again. The cage was installed in 1981, 100 years after Billy's death, to finally keep his marker in place. The tombstone itself tells a story. The original wooden crosses rotted away within years. In the 1940s, a movie company filming in Fort Sumner erected the current stone marker. It reads, "William H. Bonney, alias Billy the Kid, died July 14, 1881. The Pals marker was restored too, connecting Billy eternally with O'Folliard and Bowdra. Fort Sumner transformed from a frontier settlement to a pilgrimage site. The room where Billy died no longer exists. The Maxwell House was demolished in the 1930s, but tourists still come by the thousands, searching for something authentic in the legend. Modern DNA tests have debunked every claim of Billy's survival. Men across the West spent decades claiming to be Billy the Kid, insisting Garrett killed the wrong man. Science proved them all liars. The body in Fort Sumner is indeed William Bonney. Here's the truth about Delavina's possible betrayal. She lived until 1927, never marrying, always defending Billy's memory. But she also never explained who might have sent that anonymous tip. When asked directly, she would change the subject or leave the room. Her silence speaks volumes. The mythology versus reality of Billy the Kid reveals America's need for outlaw heroes. A small-time rustler who killed 9 men became a Robin Hood figure who killed 21. A confused death in darkness became a heroic last stand. A young man's tragedy became a nation's legend. Pat Garrett's fate proved equally tragic. He spent 27 years living with his decision, writing books, defending his actions, running for office on his reputation. In 1908, he was shot in the back while urinating beside a road, dying as ingloriously as the man he'd killed. What Billy represented was the closing of the frontier itself. His death marked the end of an era when young men could reinvent themselves in the West, when justice was personal, when reputation mattered more than law. After Billy, the Wild West became the Old West. Modern Fort Sumner embraces its dark history. The Billy the Kid Museum displays artifacts both real and fake. Gift shops sell replicas of his gun, though he died unarmed. Tourists pose beside his caged grave, perpetuating a legend built on misunderstanding. The question of justice remains. Was Garrett right to shoot an unarmed man in darkness? Was Billy a villain who deserved his fate, or a victim of circumstances? Over 140 years later, historians still debate these questions. In that dark bedroom, it wasn't just Billy who died, it was the Wild West itself. The age of legendary outlaws ended with 2 shots in the darkness. What followed was civilization, order, and the transformation of truth into myth. Every July 14, someone leaves flowers on Billy's grave. Sometimes they're from tourists. Often they're from locals whose families remember a different Billy, one who spoke Spanish, danced at their parties, and died reaching for beef, not a gun. The steel cage around his tombstone is the perfect metaphor. Even in death, Billy the Kid cannot be contained. His legend escaped that dark room in Fort Sumner and will outlive us all, because America needs its outlaws, even if it has to cage their graves.